So good evening, everyone. Welcome to our final session of CPAC Summer School. Tonight, I'm welcoming Chris Canning, who's from the Mount Greylock Regional School District. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about English language learners or English learners. They're called ELLs or ELs, and how special education interacts. So thanks for coming tonight and welcome, Chris.
Okay, so my name's Chris Canning. I've been in this field for over 3 decades. I have been an expert and a specialist with the Department of State on contract in 15 countries working with their ministries of ed. I have specialized in English language learners and special education for many years, and I'm going to walk you through what you need to know in addition to what happens with special education because of what school districts may do and do. Okay. Right now, I wanted to see on the screen, why even give this type of a presentation? First of all, if you can see your screen, it says to date, schools and courts have largely ignored the intersection of language and disability, and K-12 public schools often operate as though IDEA addresses one set of students and EEOA another set of students. And many students select and implement their English language acquisition programs without giving any thought to unintended consequences on special education. And we're going to get into that in a minute. If you overlook here at related resources, I have given you a list, which will also be with Leslie. This entire presentation has been put into a PDF for you, that tells you where you can connect if you need the resources, if you need funded partnerships, or if you have questions, especially when it pertains to civil rights. Okay, now here's the first reminder I'm going to give you. A child must not be found eligible for special education services according to IDEA if the determining factor is limited to language barrier or lack of English proficiency. Many of you may remember back in the days in the 70s where they showed high proportion of children of color being put in special education programs when they did not belong in special education programs. Often because school districts don't want to pay for an English language teacher, they kind of find a designation, put them in special education, leave them in a resource room. That is absolutely illegal. They are violating a child's civil rights. Further, they are also violating a child's right to have equity to accessing a curriculum. So I want to talk to you first about how to divide them. The first thing you do when you see the student, you figure out, are they papered or not papered? Not papered usually has the slang term illegal. Now, why do you need to know that? If the child is papered and they're going to get on an ESL plan, their information will be listed with Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. Well, one would think non-papered would be too, but they're not. Anyone who does not have legal status in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, their records are held in the governor's office. Often it's to prevent ICE and other immigration officials from getting access to these children. How do school districts try to get rid of these children? They say to them, oh, you can't have lunch. You don't have a social security number. That's why in the state we have what's called the SASID. They can just tell the student, the school district can, that we're going to give you an ID, and they are eligible for free lunch. They are eligible for care. And if you have further questions on that, in 2016, I was a speaker at an Office of Civil Rights conference down in Springfield, and I can give you that whole presentation. Now, I just want you to think about the numbers. You think, oh, maybe there's not that many in Massachusetts. 10% of all children in school in Massachusetts do not speak English as their first language and are receiving English language learner services. So if you look here, students who are identified as English language learners can participate in language assistance programs to help ensure they attain English proficiency and meet the academic content and achieve standards expected of all students. Why is this important? You will see this even in special education. They have classes that are AP, but the student can't get in them because they had to have X, Y, and Z. So there's little hidden agendas and barriers that keep children out. This is why it's important to say, what can they attain? And I think Springfield Public Schools did an excellent job in creating what was once called a pilot program called SWAS, which was a school within a school. So they had dual licensed people such as myself teaching, and then we were able to get more students into AP. Now, the data from only 2020 is what DESE has out right now, and also the Department of Ed in Washington. Right now, there are 5 million students registered in US public schools who don't speak English. As I said, in Massachusetts right now, they're averaging 10.2% are designated English language learners. Okay, so what gives the child an ELL designation for qualified services? Let's look. Child has to be at least age 3 through 21. They have to be prepared to go into an elementary school or secondary school. Now, there are multiple categories here and even more questionable ones, which you probably won't be aware of. One, they don't have to be born in the United States and their native language doesn't have to be English. 2, who is a Native American or Alaskan Native, even living in outlying areas, they qualify for English language services. Or they come from an environment where language other than English has a significant impact on the individual level of English learned. So for example, if you have students living in the barrio and everywhere they hear at home is Spanish, even though they speak English, they can qualify for services. Also, children whose migratory or native language is other than English, or where English isn't the dominant language. Also, whose difficulties in speaking, reading, writing, understanding English language may be sufficient to deny the individual the ability to meet the state academic standards or the ability to be successful in classrooms where language of instruction is English, or the opportunity to participate fully in society. So why would this be important? Let's say you have a child who comes to you this year in Massachusetts who's an exchange student. They're here for 1 year. They're not one of our citizens. They don't maybe speak English. They're from Belgium. They are eligible for English language services, in addition to special education services. Further, my children are a great example. When I brought my children back from the United Arab Emirates, people said, oh, they must speak Arabic. Well, my husband was Scottish. I'm American. They did speak English. So they didn't necessarily qualify, even though they were born abroad. So it really depends what's going on in the household. That's something to keep in mind, because sometimes the child can speak English, the family can't. Well, when the child goes home to do the homework, they expect the mother or father to help, and they can't because there's a language barrier. This qualifies them for services. If you're working in the state of Massachusetts right now, according to, the state of Massachusetts, these are the top 10 languages. Matter of fact, when I was in Springfield Public Schools, I believe when I did my superintendent of school license, there were 60 different languages just within that district. But the main ones in Massachusetts spoken are Spanish, Arabic, English, Chinese, Vietnamese, Portuguese, Russian, Haitian, Hmong, and Urdu. Okay, every time you get one of these and you see the percentage, there are things you need to know that will affect their, let's say, special education designation. Let's take Spanish because I'm sure most of you have been exposed to it. In English, we might say a WH question, like, who are you? Okay, Spanish has the same. But what if we say, what do you do? We have a thing called do support in English, doesn't exist in Spanish. So that child may not be getting access to a curriculum that's equitable to a child who speaks English. And that can also affect their grades. And it also can show as a learning disability. So you have to be aware that there are language differences. Now, for yourself, if you do have a student with disabilities and they're having issues with SPED, there's also language rights that will protect them. In this PowerPoint that you'll take home, you'll see the three main ones are Title VI, the EEOA Act of 74, the ESEA Act of 1965, the 2016 Act. And state law determines, okay, now here's the thing. Federal law has basic protections and every state can adapt to equal or higher of it. Massachusetts is fabulous. And I mean this, fabulous, because of Matsal. And we really do try to do more for students. Other states like Arizona may not do as much for students. Here are the specific state law where it will most likely help you. Now, there is one state law you might see, and it's called MGL 71A 4, and you see SLIFE. What does SLIFE mean? It's a term used for any child, and I'm sure you'll see this in special education, who have interrupted or transient learning. And interrupted learning means maybe they're migrant children, or maybe they're trafficked children, or maybe their life is interrupted. And I will give you a perfect example, because a lot of times these children are transient and they move from school district to school district, but the files don't go with them. I had a student, she was 14 on baby number 3. I said to her, where's the father? She said, and he wasn't here. And I asked if he was in one of our special programs with the district, for which she said no. I said, well, where is he? And she said, he's 32, which meant he got her pregnant first at 11, which meant I filed a 51A. The minute the parents found out, the mother came into the school ripping. She said to me, you ruined our good thing. He paid the bills. That child disappeared and no one was able to trace her. And that is a huge issue with ELLs about where they are and where they're going. So sometimes when they're in special education, their files might not go, and you might have to reevaluate what they're actually telling you. And this is a very common problem. Okay, now, as far as Massachusetts goes, K-12, English learners with disabilities. Some ELLs have disabilities and qualify for special education services, and they'll be in 2 categories, which I'll show you in a minute. There's language development programming, and special education programming are not necessarily exclusive, and ELs must receive services, supports, resources, and programming for which they are eligible. In other words, ELs are eligible for special education services if they meet IEP eligibility criteria. Conversely, students with a disability are eligible for an ELE program if they are ELs. What does that mean? If a student is being tested for a specific learning disability, they cannot be tested in English. They have to be tested in their native language, and the score must match that of a score of a child who is their age, their level, and speaks their language. So a lot of school districts will say, oh, I matched them up against other 3rd graders who speak English. No, their age, their level, their language. That's if it's a learning disability. The other, and this is why they say it, is for social emotional, which many of us know students need support, because many students that are coming to you that are English language learners have social emotional issues, have been through trauma, and suffer great forms of PTSD. In 2010, I know the state of New Hampshire, Vermont had me as their main speaker on how to help English language learners who have PTSD get public school support. So this is a very important thing to do and to know. So as I said here, you could have a social emotional designation, or you can have a learning disability. Why is it important? Because ESL students have the right to receive guidance and counseling in their language for academic, psychological, college, career counseling, same as any other student. But how does that get lost in translation? Here's the perfect example. Many years ago, I was in a particular inner city school district, and I had a student named Juan who was on for a learning disability. But Juan had taken a lighter and he had burned the walls of the public school, and they were trying to see in the manifestation hearing, did his disability match with what happened? Obviously it didn't. It was a reading disability. Turns out when I went to the mother and said, can you sign? She said yes. And I said, is there a father? And normally they used to say no, but this one said yes. So I said, father has to come in on Monday. And she says, no, the grandfather can come. And I said to her, no, it's got to be the father. That's when we found out the grandfather was the father. At this point, that child didn't have any psychological services, so we were able to add on a social emotional designation and got him all the services they can. And as I mentioned to Leslie, one of the bigger problems you're going to have, a lot of families don't believe in special education. For 15 years of my life, I worked in the Arab world, and they have a belief in Islam that God makes everyone perfect, and to suggest someone is not perfect means God is not perfect, and it is a cultural norm. that is when I suggest, and Leslie says there are many resources that you can contact the Children's Federation, that you get a person who is in that field who can talk to them, who relates to their culture. Otherwise, the student may or may not get the services needed, okay, because of the stigmas attached. Now, here's the last two things you need to know. There are two types of laws that address education with ELLs and disabilities. Number one, those that pertain to language learning and those that pertain to provisions of special education services. The first part of the article that I've been giving you that's going to Leslie will discuss all the obligations in respect to ELLs, including ELLs with disability, 1964. But the second one is specific obligations that you need to know about. And they pertain to ELs with disabilities under IDEA and the special education statutes. IDEA is both a funding statute and a civil rights statute. It was enacted obviously under the 14th Amendment. What people don't realize, under the 14th Amendment, we have cases like the Brown case, which is very important because you're looking at equal rights. You're looking at, can you give them, for example, the same book and expect them to learn it if they can't read it? You know, one district once said, we gave everybody the same book. They had the same equal access to the curriculum. Did they? No, they did not. And the Supreme Court agreed they did not. All right. So with that, you have to understand with their evaluations, what is their identification? Now, when you're conducting these special education evaluations, the districts must, number one, ensure the assessments and the evaluation materials are selected and administered in a manner that is not discriminatory on a racial or a cultural basis. Two, the assessments must be administered in a language and form that is most likely to provide accurate information about what the child know and can do unless it's not feasible to do so. Three, there has to be trained and knowledgeable personnel administering these assessments. You're going to say, well, how does that necessarily work? I'll give you a prime example of when I first went into this, returning to the United States. My daughter was in kindergarten. She was partially deaf, hard of hearing, got her kindergarten report card back. She had an F in listening, went in and saw the teacher. I said, why has my kid got an F in listening? She says, I say it the first time. I don't really believe they have disabilities. And she said to me, it was not her job. That's when you got the SPED director, and guess what? Was her job. But you realize that these things happen, and that's with a parent who's an advocate. Imagine parents who don't have one. So special education often doesn't realize how the family support at home doesn't know the laws because they can't read them. And so it's more important also, if this happens, you contact what's called in the state MATSOL, M-A-T-S-O-L. And they have people, and they have a whole section of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed dedicated to not only helping you help English language learners, but also English language learners with disabilities. Okay, and again, I need to remind you, a child cannot be eligible for special education services if the determining factor is an English language proficiency or language barrier. Now, if you look on this next slide, it's like one melds into the other. In the development of an IEP for a student with English language proficiency, districts have to take whatever action is necessary to ensure the child's parents also understand what is happening in that meeting. That means they have to find an interpreter in the native language, which is not English. You're saying, well, what if the school district says they can't? There's great offices down in the federal building in Boston. I've gone down to use them. The guy who used to run it's Armando Silva. He just recently retired. I'm not sure who's following him, but if you go there, they will get you state interpreters if you need one. Also, districts must provide parents with written consents, just like you would with an IEP, but sometimes the parents don't want to consent because they want their child not to be labeled as English language learners, just like you have parents who may not want their child with a SPED designation. They are separate. So you have to have two different forms with them, but they do have to know their safeguards in their native language. Lastly, when you get to equity to access, there are differences by states and by barriers that exist under what I like to call the hidden agenda. Different school districts might violate students' rights. And I'll give you an example of 2 that I have called out with the state. 1, using tutors. Just because a person can speak English does not mean they can teach English or understand languages. There are certain domains and certain processes that have to be taught for a student to master second language acquisition. So if a school district is offering your child on a SPED plan tutors for English, absolutely illegal, and I would recommend you report it immediately to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. Another situation, and this was a level 1 designated school district, walked into there and there was a girl who was tied with a dictionary. I said to her, "What are you doing?" Kid said to me, "They've left her there in the guidance office with this dictionary alone." I said to the guidance counselor, "Where's her English language learner teacher?" And the guidance counselor says, "It's one kid. We don't want to waste our money in the budget." Picked up a call and called DESE. You can't do that. Even if there's 1 student, they have to have a specialized teacher in addition to the SPED teacher. And that teacher needs to be licensed in ESL. Now, if you're not sure, over here is the Kasenda 3-prong test. And this is very easy when you can start to see what's the educational theories, the programs and practices, the results of student language barriers, are they being overcome? People can put a lot on paper, doesn't mean it's in practice. So this is something that when you're looking at it, this is how the state will determine if the school district is giving your client or the student you work with that has a special needs the correct language supports as well. All right, now this slide, you'll see it when it gets sent to you via Leslie. In Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed, every child is labeled, and these are the different labels so that you know what their program is. Because the school district might say to you, he's a DEO 021. Okay, that means it's the first year schools in the United States. That's all it means. It's just so that you have like a little dictionary to look things up. And that is basically everything that I have for you tonight that would talk to you about compliance, in addition to the 15 articles, the bilingual type dictionary for all English language learner terms, and your SIM codes to work with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. I guess that's it. I hope I did it in 10 minutes as requested.